Hello everybody, back again. I just wanted to talk a bit about waste. So in the past we wasted more or less the same things people have wasted for centuries across the world in different cultures. Most of what we wasted had been laboriously harvested, made by hand, and produced specifically for us as individuals, not for a mass of people living in huge cities. So, for example, clothes were treated often like a form of currency. If you fell into debt or hardship, you could sell your clothes to others because clothes were made very carefully by people who were expert in this field. Not everyone could make clothes easily. Sometimes and people would remake their clothes for their children, when they were worn out. The clothing was very valuable. Now you can go to the shop, you can buy 10 t-shirts for the price of one t-shirt even 40 years ago. So what has happened is, as our ability to produce more goods faster, we're producing more waste. Waste is now in a different category. We think about waste in a different way. And there's a number of reasons for this. One is we have a huge population now benefiting from industrial production. We have standards of hygiene that are much higher. We use more water than we've ever used before to clean. We have very high standards of hygiene in our homes. We have very low physical tolerance of waste. We want it taken a long way from us, even if it's wasted things that still work. We have new materials like plastics, chemicals, hybrid materials that don't waste well. When we throw them away, they persist, they keep going. They still, like plastic bags. They get entangled in other creatures, in natural environments, and cause all kinds of damage. We have a technological dependence on systems that we need for heating, cooling, cooking, power, lighting, etc. And these things come to us designed by others. And often it's very difficult for us to escape these systems. They're like rails that, our train travel between these rails. We need a car if we work a long way away and there's no other form of transport. So these systems become dependent on them. And we also get caught up in consumerism, in keeping up with others. We want to make sure that we don't suffer the shame of having the wrong kind of clothing, the wrong kind of phone, the wrong kind of possessions against our peers, our peer group. So in a sense, waste has changed. Its category has changed. We have a very negative view of waste. Most things now that we waste, even though they could be reused, a lot of them, we see as something that is useless, something that has no more value, something that is dirty and should be taken away. We also have a change in our systems, the way we actually consume things, and therefore the way we waste things, and these two are connected. So when we look at the category of waste and how it's changed, waste is what is no longer valued, but this is tied to social norms, to what people believe and what their standards are in their daily life. And so because consumerism encourages us to continually look for new possessions, the old must be discarded much more quickly and replaced with the new. So attitudes towards waste are very closely aligned with attitudes towards consumption. So that the volume of what we are devaluing and throwing away has increased dramatically. If you look at the average Australian now, throws away over a kilo of stuff every week, every few days. It's a very, very large volume. And when we look at the different systems that we're, are provisioning systems. Each system, which is often associated with a particular product, is very wasteful. Medicine, health, always, anything to do with health requires packaging, requires plastic, requires equipment, which is often only used once and then thrown away. Housing, anything to do with housing. We now keep our houses for only a few years, sometimes then we move. Often when we move, we build new houses or we move into new houses. Concrete will only last around 50 years. What do we do with it? When it's finished, we have to demolish it and rebuild. Building materials, the interiors, we rip out and we refurbish. Kitchens, for example, 5 to 8 years is standard now in the West. Cars, most of us now will only keep a car for 5 or 8 years at the maximum, maybe 5. And again, this produces waste, and it produces waste even while we're running it, and pollution. Tablets, computers, phones, these all need continuous upgrading and changing. Fashion, I've already talked about clothes. Now people will go shopping and buy multiple clothes when before they would only buy one particular item. Food, we go into a supermarket and even when we go there, about 40% of the food is wasted before it even gets to the supermarket. This is how wasteful this very centralized system of food production is. So the category of waste has changed and the systems have changed, and these two together, the category and the systems. So part of the problem is we no longer know where what we consume comes from. We have very little idea. Most of us don't know how engines in cars work. We have very little understanding. All we know is there's a good brand, perhaps. And so it's the same with waste. We have very little understanding what happens after we throw away our waste. So the production, the consumption is distanced from us. It's separated from us through these systems. And this has happened over the last 100 years. We also have a reluctance to separate waste because with these very centralized systems, we allow everyone else to deal with it. So we just throw it away. Somebody else will pick it up and deal with it. And this lack of separating waste is a real problem because unless we can separate plastics, we can't reuse them, we can't recycle, and we can't deal with them. We make 350 million tons of plastic a year. We only recycle about 7 or 8, 9% at the most. This is not good enough. It means that within a decade or so, we're going to be producing 700 tons, which is frightening, So this is, we're going to end up sitting on a mountain of plastic waste and fix this problem. So technology is part of the problem, but also potentially part of the solution. So I talk about waste's increasing complexity and how when we look at, say, the pile of waste from our own lives, these are mixed things that are often too complex to deal with easily. That's why, in a way, we need to not only look at how to deal with the waste, but how to deal with the front end, how to make sure that people become engaged again in separating waste into its categories so that it can be dealt with. Food waste, for example, how to compost food waste in the home or locally so that it can be returned to the earth and reused again in a useful way. It's very important, returning nutriments to the soil. Plastics, we need to be able to recycle plastics more locally so that we can reuse them in the circular economy instead of having them in the sea causing all kinds of problems, killing whales and dolphins and other fish. Yeah. So the big wastes as well are the bigger problem, and I talk a little bit about industrial mining and agricultural and construction waste. These are the large-scale wastes. These again are driven by consumption, by demand, by consumer demand. It's not as though we decide to open a mine. not knowing if anybody's going to buy what dig out of the soil. It's consumption which is driving the demand for gold, for these precious metals, rare earths, etc. It's demand driving all this. It's not as though people decide to set up a factory and then find a customer. They have their customers ready, waiting. That's what they want. That's how the system works. So dirty wastes are an incredible problem in this world. Heavy metals, a lot of you will be looking at these problems in your work, in your studies. They're very, very serious. But until we change consumption, we're going to have difficulty changing production and also changing extraction and changing the waste system as well. Yeah. So I talk a little bit about e-waste. It's one of the problems is shifting waste around the world doesn't necessarily solve our problems. We need to start working out how to solve them here, in China, in Australia, in a local setting. And this is really what a lot of you are learning in your degrees.